it is well time for a full professor to say we need to get started. So I'm going to welcome us and share my screen and show you the agenda for tonight's meeting. So I'm here to welcome you, Mike Clossy, Oregon Forest Resources Institute, on behalf of the Washington County chapter, to welcome you to tonight's meeting. And I don't think Vic is here yet, unless he snuck in. So we will catch him at the end. And the May meeting, Mark Arendt will tell us about that, but I'm going to turn it quickly over to John Doomer just to give us a teaser. And when Mark is here later at the end, we'll have him give us the full report on the May meeting.
All right, thanks, Mike. So the meeting in May will be on May 26th, and the topic will be alternative activities or uses of forest land. So I believe he has a zip line outfit that he's going to welcome to kind of talk about their experience, and we'll let him tell us more. I think orienteering might be another piece, so you'll want to tune into that. May 26th.
All right. So before I turn it over to Tom, any other announcements from leadership? Kathy, John, Tom, Shoemakers, what's up? Anything you need to share?
Just a word on programming. We are planning on having a couple of tours this summer, and Bonnie and Bob have graciously volunteered to host a tour day Shoemaker Farm. I believe that's in June, and I'm not sure if a date has been set yet. And then the other tour will be the Tree Farmer of the Year tour, which will be in September. And we're going to actually be able to visit Barrett Brown and his family's farm that we had the video virtual tour of last year. So those are the two activities that are planned. And I'm not sure, Bob and Bonnie, if you've selected a date for the tour of your place yet.
We're thinking it'll be a twilight tour, probably June 22nd, but not written in stone yet. You'll read about it in the May Forest Forum.
Okay. It's amazing how deadlines for newsletters cause us to plan, right? I like it. Okay. Well, those both sound like fun. So I'm going to move on. And as you can see on the agenda, there's two parts for today's meeting. The first one, featured content 1, is on the Tualatin River Watershed Council, and Scott McCune is here. And I'm going to turn it over in a minute to Tom Nygren to introduce him. And Scott will talk for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. And then we'll have featured content 2. Mike Cafferetta from ODF is going to talk about the 2020 fire season in Washington County and what 2021 looks like. And then we'll get the Tardy boys to give us the wrap up. So I'm going to stop sharing and ask Tom Nygren to introduce Scott McCune.
Well, thank you, Mike. Well, I'm very proud to be able to introduce Scott. But before I do, I'd like to give you a little background on the Watershed Council. Some of you may not have much knowledge or experience with the council. The council really started back in the late 1990s when the salmon plan came out at state level and the establishment of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. One of the programs they set up was the Watershed Council system and authorized the OWEB, as it's called, to facilitate setting up watershed councils around the state. And I think there are about 85 of them now. Scott can correct me on that, but there's a lot of them. And they're all different. They're different because even though they're all have to be chartered by the county commissioners in each county, they are designed by a citizen group. And Washington County is one of the more unique kind because ours is really representative of all the major economic environmental interests in the county. Some of the watershed councils tend to focus more on just environmental issues, but ours has a broader mandate. I've been on the council for a long time, When I took over this representative position, Ron Larson was the representative. I was hoping Ron would be on tonight because Ron was the original Tualatin River Watershed Council representative for Washington County Small Woodlands. We represent, by the way, I have an alternate, Eric Chambers. We really need to have an alternate for every member in the council. It's important, I think, for the Washington County Small Woodlands to be represented on the council because it represents all of these major economic environmental interests in the county. And of course, forestry is a big one. It tends to be overlooked a lot of times, even though 40% of the county is in forest lands. We actually have on the council 2 representatives in forestry. We have one for the small woodland owners and one for the industrial forest owners. It's important because a lot of issues come up that the Watershed Council is involved in. There are issues concerning the use of water, the protection of water, and opportunities to improve and protect that watershed. So it's important that we as forest land owners be involved in that. Now, the point person heading that up is Scott McEwen, because Scott is the executive director of the Tualatin River Watershed Council. He's been there about 2 years. I was lucky to be on the initial nominating or selecting committee that selected Scott. And I was impressed by his background. He's got a lot of prior experience dating all the way back to working with watershed councils back in Michigan. When he came out here, he's been working with representing different programs with the Columbia Land Trust and other organizations, and has a very good ability to work with across boundaries between organizations. So very helpful thing for us because our Watershed Council is mainly a facilitating organization. We work with other organizations. We don't have a lot of money to do things ourselves. We have to help get things done through other organizations. So Scott is really important in helping us build these relationships, and he's already in these 2 years has made significant progress in doing that. So I would like you to welcome Scott, and Scott, I hope you'll tell us why you think it's important that we be involved in your efforts.
Thank you, Tom. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up if you can. Great. So yeah, Tom was on the hiring committee for me, so I was able to pull the wool over his eyes and get the job. So no, but Tom spent time in Michigan, the Upper Peninsula. So anybody who spent time in the Upper Peninsula is okay with me. I still actually own 40 acres small woodland in northern Michigan in an area called Little Traverse Bay area up near the Mackinac Bridge. And we've got a sugar maple stand on that. It's northern hardwoods. I can't get back there as much as I'd like, but every August you'll see me out in Michigan tending my woodlot. So as long as I can keep that, I will. I've got a 14-year-old son who I'm going to teach how to hunt out there and fish. So it's just nice to have a piece of ground. But I live in Oregon now, which is a fabulous place to do water work. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Watershed Council, but more I want to share a little bit with you about a program that we're developing that has kind of some good information that will help small woodlands and large woodlands owner as it relates to their lands as well as our shared waterways. So I'm going to share my screen, and I've already started my timer, so I will be promptly off in half an hour. So there, can everybody see that okay? Thumbs up if you can.
Looks good.
Okay. So I start that because I do so many Zoom calls now with PowerPoint that it's just like, it seems like every every day somebody's giving a PowerPoint. So, well, as Tom said, I've been with the Watershed Council for about 2 years now, a little over 2 years. And we are a stakeholder-based organization. And we really were formed to act as a convener, to gather people, various stakeholders, landowners, land managers, residents, agencies, state agencies, federal agencies, to convene around sometimes challenging issues. And there are many. There are issues related to our water, drinking water supply, our wastewater treatment, our land use laws. And the Watershed Council is one place where we try to create a shared space where people can discuss difficult issues. What that means from one year to the next is different. So, you know, just last meeting, we had Tom Vanderplatt from Clean Water Services come and talk about the Scoggins Dam, what's happening with that. Will it be retrofitted anytime soon? What are some of the issues that they're facing? What do the environmental concerns have with the dam, et cetera, et cetera. So having a place where people can discuss these items is kind of an essential feature of a watershed council. Tom said there's 40% forestry in the watershed. I'm going to give you another 10%, say 50%. That may not be a correct statistic, but here's just a few different statistics in terms of land use and then also some water resources. And I also just love this map. You'll see a lot of maps in this presentation. I'm just kind of a map geek. And I spend a lot of time looking at maps, and there's such a value for people who work in water resource issues. And this is just a great illustration of the different elevations, kind of the higher elevations of the headwaters, then extending down in the valley floor. And then also you can see sort of the urban areas in a pale gray there. So, you know, we do have a really interesting balance of different land uses. And each land use has got its own suite of issues and concerns, problems and challenges. And we're trying to address them in a variety of different levels. I promise you that I'll share with you a lot of maps, and this is one that I just think is fabulous. This is from 1945 of the lower Mississippi River. And does anybody see what this is? These are all the river bends. These are all the oxbows of the Mississippi River over tens of thousands of years. I don't even know how long the Mississippi River has been meandering like this, but this is what it was like, you know, kind of before the federal levee system was put in. And so I share this with you because it was done in old school cartography. It was done with chains and, you know, survey rods and going out on the field. You know, there probably was some aerial imagery done as well, but it's really just, to me, it's a work of art. And it also reminds me that rivers are dynamic systems. And we often want them to be static systems, but they're not. And anybody who's worked with rivers, particularly during our winter flows, knows that rivers change. They change within their floodplains. Even when you've got levees, tide gates in estuary systems, rivers move. And that's just a fact of life. Same thing with forests burn. And we just have to figure out how to mitigate those damages and plan for those natural disasters. Some people call them natural disasters. Some people call them natural processes. So it really depends on the time scale that you're looking at. The other map that I just love showing is of a map of the Willamette River in the area of Corvallis. And this image was developed using a technology called LiDAR. And LiDAR is something that I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight, and how we're using LiDAR to inform some of our water resource decisions. So you'll see here, so the Willamette Valley was filled with flood deposits from the Missoula floods over a 3,000 year period, from 15,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago. Multiple floods filled the Willamette Valley with flood deposits. And so the valley floor is very filled with sediment. And so the Willamette River, Lower Gales Creek, the Tualatin River just cut through that sediment, and they just keep cutting because there's, I don't know how deep it is. Does anybody know how deep the Missoula flood deposits are in the Tualatin Basin? They have to be, 100 feet deep, more maybe. But it's a very erodible. You can go down in Hillsborough. You can go down many feet before you hit bedrock. So it's a really dynamic system in the Willamette Valley. And this image using LiDAR is compelling to me. So you're all a very literate, on top of things group. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what LiDAR is. But it's a technology that's being used more and more in a whole variety of transportation, oceanographic, forest management, using fixed wing planes or even drones sometimes to fly over an area and then shoot down a laser beam. And the laser beam bounces off the ground and then bounces back up and hits a sensor in the plane or the drone. And that bouncing back and forth measures elevation. And so the technology now, you can get down to centimeters accuracy with elevations. So whereas, for 50 years or so, the best we could get was like 10 meters elevation using aerial photography or other technologies. Now we can get down to centimeters. So we have much more ability now to use something called LiDAR to help us with our natural resource decision making. In Washington County, there's been a consortium of interest, Clean Water Services, Metro, Washington County, that come together, and every 5 years they fly a new flight of LiDAR. So 2019, the most recent LiDAR was flown, and that's the most accurate yet, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But some of the fun things that I just like, that just blow my mind, the image on the right is from a national park or a national monument in Iowa that I've never been to before. It's called the Marching Bear Mounds. And you can see on the left, those bear images. And these were built by mound building peoples, tribes, back pre-Columbus. And there's a whole mound building civilization that existed thousands of years ago, hundreds and thousands of years ago. And I share this image with you because on the left, my left, hopefully it's your left, I don't know how the screen works, but you can see the bear images from the air. And the image of the forest area is what it looks like on the ground. So this is a great depiction of how LiDAR can see through trees. And that's so important because so much of the Tualatin Basin and Oregon is covered by forest cover. So we now have a capability to see the ground, the bare ground through the trees. Another really fascinating example to me, and this is something that you can Google and just find a whole bunch of Natural Geographic information about and Smithsonian, but they're now using LiDAR to investigate where you've heard of the Mayan ruins and the Aztec ruins. Well, look at the image above of the forest floor, or the forest cover, the canopy. This, I think, is in Honduras. And that's what it looks like if you're flying over in a plane. But LiDAR is actually able to see through the tree cover, and look what it can see underneath. It can see the actual structures that the Mayans built. And so they're now doing these kinds of flights all over, not only in Central America, but they're doing it in England, like along Hadrian's Wall, to find Roman features, Roman walls and Roman fortresses. So it's this capability that is just really, it's just mind-blowing. And we're using it now in the Tualatin. So I'll share a little bit with you about that. So the image that says non-LiDAR, 10 meters, has been the standard that we've worked with elevation models over time. And you can see it's kind of blurry and fuzzy. You can kind of see that there's hills in there, and you can see a river. You can see sort of where the floodplain is. And then the image that is 2.5 meter accuracy, look at how all those additional images pop out. You can see very small tributaries. You can see floodplain terraces. You know, you can see the different elevations of the floodplain. You can see where erosion's occurring. So there's just a huge amount of capabilities that emerge from the ability to use LiDAR. So here's an example. One of the things that we're looking a lot at is where we're seeing landslides. And so you're familiar with Dogami. Dogami's done a lot of landslide modeling where we are going to expect landslides, you know, seasonally through high water, or where you're going to see the worst landslides, land slippages during the Cascadia subduction event that is due, you know, between now and 200 years from now. And so in LiDAR, you can actually see landslide features, and I'll show you some of those. We also have this tool that, so we're using LiDAR to then be a layer in analytical capability called NetMap. So we purchased a GIS package called NetMap that allows us to use LiDAR to help us understand how the landforms influence our water features. So this is an example, one example of how we use NetMap. So NetMap basically uses LiDAR, a digital elevation model, to create a synthetic watershed, a virtual digital watershed. So this image here that you see is of an area up near Glenwood. So you've been through Glenwood. Here's highway, what is that, Highway 6, kind of going this way towards the coast. And you can see where the potential landslide areas are. So we now have this capability to analyze, where post wildfire, you get landslides, you get debris flows. Where are you more likely to see them based on a whole variety of features? So one of the things that we're all really concerned about related to wildfires, and have any of you been driven out the gorge recently? Raise your hand if you have driven out 84. Well, my son was doing a science fair experiment out there. And so over the last 3 months or so, we drove out the gorge to do some soil samples. And there were debris flows coming across the historic highway, just all up and down. And those are after the Eagle Creek fire. So debris flows and landslides are a post-fire, that they occur in a post-fire environment. So understanding where you're more likely to get debris flows and landslips is important for pre-wildfire planning and also post-wildfire response. So the image there on your on the right of your screen is showing a stream network. So the dark blue are the areas where you're least likely to see debris flows entering into streams. Lighter blue, a little bit less likely. And then these other areas, the yellows and the reds, these are the areas where you're most likely to see debris flows based on soils, based on slope, and based on kind of historic landslides. So here's a kind of another zoom out just to kind of ground truth ourselves. So here's an image up here. This is a Google Earth image. And you can see these little white arrows here. You can go onto Google Earth and you can see all of these little landslides, all these little landslips all over Google Earth in the cut forest lands. And what our consultant did was then he took the NetMap analysis and looked at the Google Earth to just check, yes, indeed, NetMap is showing that there are these areas in Google Earth that also showed up in the NetMap analysis. So we've got, we've got this kind of analysis done throughout the basin, East Fork, Dairy Creek, McKay Creek, Gales Creek. So we're getting a better understanding, like if we have a wildfire in the source water protection area above Hagg Lake, where are you most likely to see landslides? And how are those landslides going to be contributing large wood into the Hagg Lake Reservoir? And how could that cause problems? Do you need to put up booms, et cetera? So there's a whole bunch of thinking around debris flows. Here's another image that I think is kind of compelling. These different letters, A, B, C, D, E, these are all areas where you've seen historic landslides. So here's actually Highway 6. You see it kind of coming along here? And that's actually in an old landslide. This is a huge rubble debris field that Highway 6 is driving over. So you've probably noticed sometimes the road is kind of like a little wavy a little bit, and sometimes it's sort of buckling a little bit. It's because it's built on a really unstable system. And so we've got this kind of mapping done throughout the Tualatin Basin. So, you know, obviously knowing where landslides and debris flows are likely to occur is going to inform forest managers, transportation managers of where you're potentially the greatest risk for landslides or debris flows. So here's just an example. Again, you know, LiDAR has just got this ability to like see through the forest canopy. So here you can see some forest roads kind of coming along this slope here. There are all these gullies along here and this little kind of a, not much of a road. It's not like a graveled maintained road, but it's a forest road that comes across here. And looky here, like right here, these two areas, which are right here, these are also highly prone to landslides. So knowing where these slips are likely to occur is going to help forest managers understand, like, okay, you can put in this road, but if you're going to get a big flood, if you're going to get fire, that road may not persist. So one of the things that we are trying to unpack, and this is just something that we're needing to spend a lot of time on, is really understanding where the roads are, because nobody's really done a thorough mapping of them. So we partnered with the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District to look at using LiDAR to see through the forest canopy to try to identify as many roads as we could. And once we got into this project, it got a lot more complicated than we knew it would be. So I'm just going to share a little bit of that like hair pulling exercise that we undertook. So we chose this area, this red outlined area, which is all part of the source water protection area. So obviously for people who are using the Joint Water Commission's drinking water supply, or people who are irrigators who are using Hag Lake for irrigation, what happens above Hag Lake in a post-fire environment, in a landslide environment. Obviously roads are something that is going to be part of the calculus in the source water protection area. So we looked at, so this is just a snapshot. This doesn't have all of the roads in it, but you can see the purple here. These are Washington County roads. So this is like unincorporated Washington County down here. You know, obviously you've got Beaverton that's not filled out here. We don't have the roads of Hillsborough that would be right here. But these purple lines are kind of county roads. And most of them down here in the valley floor are all paved. There are gravel ones as well, but many of them are paved. And then as you get up into this area here, the more the forested headwaters, this is a different road layer. This is Oregon Department of Forestry road layer. And they have some information about, well, what is the surface type? Is it paved? Is it gravel? Is it just natural? They have some of that information, but it's not complete at all. So what this pilot project tried to do was try to use LiDAR to see what we could figure out just using LiDAR. And I'll share you some images. So here's our study area down here that I showed. Here's Hag Lake. And you'll see from our pilot, we determined that some of these areas are gravel. Some of the blue ones are unimproved. And so what we looked at in terms of forest road features, whether it was paved, whether paved highway, so its width, we could determine its width in LiDAR, whether it's just a paved road, so 16 feet width, whether it's a gravel road. So you can use width to determine whether it's paved or gravel. 12 feet, unimproved road, they're typically around 10 feet or so. We also did a couple of other things that were a little challenging. We tried to figure out if we could see where culverts would be, and also where there are water bars in a road that direct drainage into the forest floor. And I'll share some of these images with you just to see what we saw. So the image to your left, this is kind of an example of sort of a forest area. You know, you can't see the roads underneath the forest, right? These are all lines that were drawn in GIS. But then when you pull away the forest, all of a sudden you have a lot of different features. You have, I don't even know what these are. Does anybody know what those are? It's an industrial forest land. So there's something, you know, wood piles or brush piles or something like that.
It's probably a historic practice of using a dozer to pile up slash. And I don't,
Yeah.
that hasn't been done probably in, well, it's still done occasionally, but very rare. So that's probably a historic feature from a.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's interesting, right? I mean, that's like our own sort of archaeology.
Yeah.
And then this image over here, you can actually see the grooves. You know, like if you're driving down a gravel road, some of these forest gravel roads, you can see the grooves. So you would have grooves in a gravel road, but not in a paved road or not in an unmaintained road. So that's kind of one technique that was used by our consultant that was Geoterra, who did this for us.
Scott,
Here,
oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think some of those other features are, you know, you mind if you call them roads, how your definition of roads are, but those are old skid roads from a harvest in the 40s, probably.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll get into some of that. Just like,
okay,
where do we like draw the line? Like, what is a road? What is an old skid road? You know, what matters and what doesn't matter? You know, because you can spend an infinite amount of time trying to identify and outline where everything is, but for what purpose? So here's another example of where we use LiDAR and also something called ArcHydro to try to figure out where are the culverts. So culverts are really important for forest managers. And we found that we could use this thing called ArcHydro, which are the blue lines, where GIS is predicting where the stream channel is. And then also this road layer. And these little green lines here are where our modelers predicted where the culverts would be. And we went out there, we field verified some of these things. And indeed, there were culverts in all these locations. If you didn't have culverts here, then the road would probably be washing out. So we felt like with some confidence that we could use LiDAR to identify where culverts were, if there wasn't already a map of where the culverts in the road system is. Another kind of interesting wonky thing is water bars. Like, and you can actually see these little lines here. These are water bars. I mean, imagine that you've got a plane that's flying at thousands of feet up and it can see a water bar. You know, we can now see below the forest cover, we can see water bars on roads. So this is important because if there are areas that are more prone, some roads that are more prone to be delivering sediment into a stream, and maybe using water bars more strategically would help reduce the amount of water and erosion that's going from a road into a stream, that's a management technique that we can recommend to people. So then finally, kind of, you know, getting back to Mike's point, it's like, where do you stop all this? Like, look at these images. I mean, there's just so much skid trails and, you know, slash piles and just like, what are the roads that we should be focusing on? And sort of where we've sort of arrived at with this, and we're not done with our thinking, it's continuing to evolve, but certainly areas where you have a road that you can actually see some road failures in the imagery. And so where you've got a road failing that is crossing over a stream, you may have more from a stream ecology standpoint and from a stream health standpoint, these may be the areas that we should be focusing on. So Let me check my time. Okay, we've got a couple minutes left. So this is sort of our mapped, our assignment. And we did find that you can use LiDAR using manual. So we didn't have a computer solve all these problems. There were GIS analysts, working with LiDAR and working with the maps to map all of this. And we did find that you could do this kind of mapping in a cost-effective manner. So like this was a pilot, we covered 50 square miles or so. It cost about $7,000. So if you had an area that was really important, like the source water protection area, we could find funding to do this kind of analysis in the right areas to really better understand where our road networks are, because roads really do have an influence on our water resources. So that's it. I left myself a minute. So are there any questions that anybody has for me?
What was the date where this LiDAR became available?
I believe, I could be wrong, but it was flown in 2019. And I think that if it's not already available, it should be available soon. You can Google Dogami LiDAR maps, and you can go to the site, and there's like a little button that you can say, look at LiDAR maps, investigate data and mapping. You can click on that and you can zoom into Washington County, and you can see, you can zoom in, and I tried it on my computer, but I think it would like freeze up my screen if I tried it. But yeah, I mean, the beauty of this is now the hillshade, which is what we've been looking at, is actually accessible to the public. And you can view it in like an online map. You can download the data if you want to download the actual LiDAR data, if you've got GIS on your computer. So it is available certainly for viewing. I know the 2014 is available, and the 2019, if it's not already available, it should be soon.
My question was, when did this technology start being used this way?
Oh, well, if you, I don't know the exact answer, but I can say that the military was using this well before the general public. Same with, GIS, same with satellites, imagery, all of that is really first innovated and deployed by the military. And then ultimately the commercial sector takes over and then sort of rolls it out more. So it's been, I don't know, does anybody know, 1980s, 1990s that it started being used?
For ODF, we've been using it probably for 10 or I don't know, maybe 15 years in forest work. So,
And OSU started teaching workshop on it about 20 years ago. So it's been around, but it's definitely more common now. So I got one question for you, Scott. So this is a great study and I love it. But my question is, this is kind of like the what so, but my question is always the so what. So you find out all this great information. So what's the Watershed Council going to do with it? How do you contact landowners? How do you come up with a plan to fix problems or challenges that you find through this LiDAR roads and stream study?
It's a great question. And I was ready for that question. So, we have just rolled this technology out. And so really in terms of how we're actually using it, our first use of it is working with the Joint Water Commission, working with Clean Water Services, and working with the SWCD on doing pre-fire planning in the source water protection area. So obviously for all of us who use Hagg Lake as a drinking water source, Hagg Lake and some of the other tributaries, a catastrophic wildfire would be a horrible thing for our water supply. It may shut down the water supply. And so knowing that and doing pre-fire planning, like, okay, well, if we have a fire, and we had fires in Shalem Ridge in the source water protection area last fall. We had fires up near Hag Lake last fall. So our forests are changing, and we should anticipate that in the east side of the Coast Range, we're likely to get more wildfires. I'll let Mike talk more about that. But certainly in areas where, like source water protection areas, knowing where the roads are, knowing where debris flows are likely to occur. I mean, there are debris flows that we're seeing that can wipe out critical infrastructure that is part of the water supply system. So, wipe out roads that are leading to Hag Lake. And so these are all, sand filters. There's any number of ways, critical infrastructure that we need to better understand the natural processes, the natural catastrophes that can happen.
All right.
Now, as we kind of further, work out the bugs, figure out what we can and can't do, then we'll start to ask other management questions. We can ask management questions with regards to beaver, flooding. What are the areas that are most likely to flood? Why, when, how often? These are all capabilities that we're going to start exploring.
Good. Kathy Doomer, I see you have your hand up.
No,
Doubly.
I haven't done the hand raise thing before. I guess it seems like one of the things you could use this for is actually verifying that the culverts are working. Like if there was a culvert that had failed, you would see it as erosion on the, I guess you'd have to do that every year. You can't depend on the every 5-year fly, but you could certainly tell if there was a really remote site where the road was degraded.
Yeah, that's definitely road maintenance. I mean, transportation departments, they're all over LiDAR. They're using this, like, it's so much more efficient than all of the groundwork that has been done. And so that is a very common thing to just, check on infrastructure.
Well, it seems like from a fire prevention perspective, there are more critical roads than others, right? I mean, there's highly critical transportation paths when it comes to fighting fires. And I would think that they would want to be using this to make sure that those roads are.
The other thing, and others can speak more eloquently than myself, but what we were looking at in LiDAR is something called bare earth. So it's actually looking through the trees at the ground surface. There are other ways that you can use LiDAR to see what's called the first return or the first hit or something like that you can actually see the tops of the trees. So you can measure how fast vegetation is growing, how fast trees are growing based on regular LiDAR flights. So you can do it with forests. Clean Water Services, part of the reason that we get these 5-year flights is that Clean Water Services, through their revegetation program, planting riparian vegetation along streams to try to cool the streams because the Tualatin's too hot. They fly these every year to then monitor, well, how fast is our riparian vegetation growing and providing shade to the streams. And so part of their monitoring of this is using LiDAR to verify that, yes, indeed, this vegetation is growing, it's providing more shade.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Scott. And I'll ask you to stop sharing while we applaud. And I will introduce Mike Caffaretta for segment 2, the second feature, which I don't know, depending on how you believe life works, either you put your best first or you save your best for last. But either way, Mike is last. Mike Caffaretta is the district forester with Forest Grove, Oregon Department of Forestry, native Oregonian, grew up outside of Springfield, graduate from OSU, graduate school at Virginia Tech. Mostly his whole career has been with ODF, and he's done just about everything. And he's going to talk to us today about fire, both the fires that happened in 2021, especially 2020, especially the ones in Washington County, and maybe a little more, and then what the prediction is for 2021. So welcome, Mr. Caffaretta.
Okay, thank you. And Scott, I appreciate hearing your talk about fire in the Coast Range and LiDAR as a tool for it. I have a hunch that we probably ought to get together and have lunch and kind of talk some of that over. So And boy, I really hope we don't get that catastrophic fire you're talking about.
It's not going to be as catastrophic, but I think our forests are definitely getting drier.
Well, we definitely dodged a bullet there in last September. And so that's really why I'm here tonight. I wanted to kind of talk to this group about that a little bit and for a couple different reasons. So yeah, we hope it doesn't happen. Certainly we had the Scoggins Creek fire there in 2013, right above Hag Lake. And then again, Hag Lake seems to be a touchy spot. So we had another one there, the power line fire this last September. So I thought I'd probably just show a few slides from September so you can kind of see what some of the conditions were like. And then the real reason for my talk, though, is to have you think about your own properties and your neighbors as leaders in the forestry community. I wanted to put this on your radar screen, and to the extent that you can do some fire planning around your property and then tell your neighbors about it and share it on your social media sites and energize them to do a little bit of work, I think it's worth their time. You're worth your time and worth their time if they do it. So I really see you as leaders, and the more you can share, the better. So that's why I wanted to come and talk to you about that. So this picture here is from Labor Day. And it was like, I don't know, midnight or 1 in the morning on, I guess it would have been the day after Labor Day if it was 1 in the morning. But that's the flag in Forest Grove, and it's that east wind is holding it out tight. So, it's really quite an event. Can everybody see my screen okay and hear me okay? Let's see, I can't really see anybody. I can see Mike. Mike, I can see you. So
Go ahead and start your show though, Michael. We're still seeing your whole everything.
there we go.
Perfect. Much better.
Okay. Yeah, you're probably reading all my future slides, but that's okay. All right. So just to, they called it an alignment of forces in the news, which is a very, they called an unusual weather event, although it happens. It wasn't that unusual. So we had it in 1933 as part of what got the Tillamook burn going. Yeah, the Eagle Creek fire, we heard a little bit about that tonight as well. So those forces do align sometimes, and this was one of them. And, the weather forecast that we had, they called it an historic east wind event. And they said the last time it happened was 2017. So I'm not sure how historic that is. If it happens every few years, it happens every so often. And one of the lessons that I took away from it, and of course we keep learning this lesson, but don't let a fire sit on the landscape until that weather alignment happens. And Tillamook burn, the first one, it actually was a relatively small fire for like 10 days until that weather pattern developed. And then that's what blew it up into a 200,000 acre fire. Chetco Bar, same thing, sat in the landscape for some period of time. It was in a difficult spot. And then the weather changed and that alignment of forces blew it all the way to the coast. I was on the Taylor Creek fire, a similar deal. And now the Beachy Creek fire, the same way. Eagle Creek was a similar thing. So anyway, I think that's one of our lessons in Forest Grove that we have our eye on, is that when we have a fire, we are going to do everything we can to contain it so it's contained before an east wind event like that develops. But the other lesson that really for this group probably is be ready. That I think maybe got a little bit lax here in the Coast Range, and we want to sort of rekindle that memory of what can happen and ask you to think about what you can do on your own properties. So let's see. The causes, no one wants to talk about the cause of wildfire because of all the legal ramifications of that. And so, they always tell us to say it's under investigation and never say what it is because you might have it wrong. And then you've accused somebody of starting a fire and then you didn't, until it's proven. So, but certainly there's a lot of rumors about power lines and certainly some about campfires. And those are two causes I think that we can all recognize as being hazardous. And you can see there the large fires that happened in September. I think everybody knows about those. I do have to have one quick shout out though here for those of you who are on West Oregon Electric. And I'm not sure who on the screen is, but that's that big green patch in the middle of our protection district is West Oregon Electric. And they're also down here, large swath of the rural environment. they shut down their power for us on September at the evening of Labor Day. And we all think that that really made a huge difference. So big thank you to West Oregon Electric. So one of the things that is how fast things happen. This fire, the power line fire, started at 6:30 in the morning on Tuesday, September 8th. And Brent O'Nien took this picture at 9:30. So, and really, I think without Brent out there helping organize and lead dozers, and later on, that source water damage you're talking about, I think we would have had, I don't know where that would have gone. It would have burned through Cherry Grove and gone, you know, it probably would have gone for 100,000 acres across the Coast Range if they hadn't got on it like that. So as it was, you know, we worked on that fire for 3 days. And for those of you who understand fire funding, you know, a little bit, but the blue line is our protection district. And, you know, we say that in Yamhill County, they were lumpers. And so forest land, we protect all the forest land in Yamhill County coming up Highway 47 on the west. You got to Washington County, we call them splitters because in the 30s when they set the line, they got to the Hag Lake area and they said, well, we don't want to have fire protection around Cherry Grove. So the blue line, we actually protect everything to the west of the blue line. And where that fire started, it's not ODF protection. It's the Gaston Rural Fire Department. And we mutual aided to help them. But really that was their fire. And it started right there south of Hag Lake. And you can see we worked on it for 3 days before containing it. And that's that wind driven fire, just a straight line, you know, with us trying to pinch it, right? Can't get in front of it, it's too hot. And so really had dozers running on both sides of it, trying to cut it off, and took 3 days to finally get out in front of it, with everybody doing everything they could. And you can see where it was going, you know, if we hadn't gotten a handle on it. So. And a couple of pictures that Brent sent in. And so it was Brent out there and the Gaston Fire Department and the Banks Fire Department joined him, and later on a task and Forest Grove Fire and Rescue, and later on a task force from Columbia County or from Clatsop County. And that group, you know, really worked hard to get that under control. Yeah. That's Tuesday morning, and then this is Tuesday night. I think really want to mention some of the groups that worked out there. This is Scott Land and Timber, and they were the ones on the dozers early on, first thing in the morning, which is really, I think, the really great thing was how quickly they got there with their dozer. This is Stimson Lumber Company. So they put together a crew. We couldn't get any crews, of course, because of the fires in California. Oregon was actually third in the national priority list. And so even with everything that was going on in Santiam and in Clackamas and in Springfield, we were third on the priority list. Southern California, Northern California, for some reason they get 2 zones, and then we were third. And so we couldn't get any crews. And so we turned to the, turned to the landowner community. This is the Bighorn Logging crew that came and put a crew together. Here's some of our staff. It's Nate Aglesoff and Ben Burns. Some of you know Nate and Ben. And there's Brent O'Nien and Renee Shippey, our dispatcher, late at night. Oh, this is John Ragsdale Cutting, Ragsdale Logging, and his feller Buncher, working with the dozers to try and build fire line. So really think that was we feel really, really good about how we came out of that. And I want to point out that community effort just because of the huge effort that everybody put into that. I think, this, last time I gave this talk, I had a person there who was from the Riverside fire, just a couple of photos to share if anybody hasn't been over and seen some of that. Here's the Riverside fire country. I won't show very much of that, but Mike, can you still hear me okay?
Yes, sound great.
And there's some of the aftermath. And you talked about the landslides a little bit, Scott, if you're still on, they talk about how all the organic material is burned off of the landscape. And it's just down, you can see all the rock. It's kind of rocky country anyway. I don't know if our country would look just like that, but really pretty incredible fire conditions. Right, so what I really wanted to do tonight is just kind of go over again what you can do on your property, and then how can you inspire your neighbors to do the same thing. And really around Hague Lake, I think there's a really good case to be made that we can do a better job around Hague Lake, or at least maybe a little more thoughtful job around how we manage that when we have that kind of weather pattern. So there's lots to do. There's a lot of places to go to get expertise. So, and I'm not gonna even maybe scratch the surface, but our ODF website has a lot of information. Keep Oregon Green, on their website, they have a lot of information. We are happy to send out a stewardship forester to walk your ground with you. And it's not a stewardship forester, one of our firefighters. We have some really excellent people on staff. They're happy to walk your property with you and give you some pointers. OSU Extension has some really great information. I mean, we mentioned that already tonight with some of their stuff. So if you need information, there's plenty out there. And of course, every situation is different, but the basics are pretty much the same. And I thought I'd just go over a few of those with you tonight. So defensible space, for those of you who live out in the forest environment, really encourage you to think about the 3 zones around your home. And so you think about that immediate zone, that within 5 feet of your house, and keeping that free of all your accumulated debris. So this is a good time to clean your gutters, blow out from under your decks, make sure your wood piles are moved away from your house, that there's no bark dust up against your house, that you're really trying to make that, don't let a creeping fire or an ember, catch. So walk around your house and look for anything within 5 feet and really try and make that free of all that kind of information, of all that kind of vegetation. And the embers will get into your vents. So you might have a way to close your vents. Obviously, having a roof that's metal is better, or at least not a cedar shake roof, and hardy plank siding is better. Those are harder to change, but the small stuff you can easily do. And then as you move out one stage from that is that intermediate zone, so that 5 to 30 feet. You really want to have that in a very fire safe environment, watered lawns, low fire resistant shrubs, well spaced, free of accumulated debris. And there's those websites I mentioned have ideas about shrubs that you can use. And what I see a lot is that when people bought their homes and did some work, they put in small plants and they put in small shrubs that were well spaced, and then a decade has gone by and that stuff has grown up and it's then dropped its leaves. And so underneath is a dry layer of 3 or 4 inches of dry leaves, and the wind is blowing up against the house. And so it's just some of that maintenance work that that's kind of gotten away from some of this. And then the last thing there, that extended zone from that 30 to 100 feet. And that's where you want to work on the ladder fuels, have your trees well spaced, prune them up 6 or 8 or 10 feet. Don't have debris underneath them that can introduce fire into the lower branches, into the lower crowns. So this is really basic stuff. And I think if you haven't done it, make sure you do it. And if you see your neighbors haven't done it, it's a great time to talk to them about it. And I'm happy to talk to them too, but often it comes best from people they know and respect. So, and there's some other things you might think about doing, especially as forest landowners, your access roads. So for one thing, getting in and out of your property, you can also do the same thing, treat that like the extended zone. So pruning up your trees, spacing them out. And you might even think about doing all your roads that way. Because if we're trying to get in there and work on a fire, if the road is closed in and tight, it's hard for our fire engines to get in. And they're also not sure if they can, and they're going to be more hesitant. But a road that looks like it's been pruned and cleaned and someone drives on it, much easier for them to get in on. And then well labeled. So if they can see that there's there's a water hole back there and it's labeled, that's great. Having turnaround spots or having an exit sign, that kind of thing, things that help them feel confident about driving in the middle of the night with fire on one side or fire behind them. That's super helpful. Doing this around the water sources so that it's accessible in a fire is great. And then if you have a power line running through your property or you have a railroad, that'd be another place you might think about doing some of this work. And so my folks have a rail line running through one of their properties, and we put in a fire trail all along it and pruned it back and thinned it out just in case they spark something. We don't want it to take off on our property. So and my dad takes a leaf blower out. I'm sure it's on his agenda for pretty soon, and he'll blow it out and try and make sure it's down to bare soil again. So that's what you can do. That's one of the main things you can do, I think. And if you can do that and then tell your neighbors about it, encourage your neighbors, that would be great. Another thing I think that I think about with the fire like we had, conditions like we had, is public use. And, none of us like to have trespassers on our property. And as, we manage Tillamook State Forest, and obviously we have a ton of public use. And we actually evacuated the forest ahead of that windstorm. And so we prevented fires by asking everybody to leave. And so that's something you can think about. And you may have a spot on your property that people like to gather and have a bonfire, or occasionally you find shooting debris if you don't live there. And one thing I would say is when we have a weather forecast like we had, that's when you really want to prevent that use. And so it's probably worth your time to go out and make sure no one's there. If it's a Friday night or a Saturday night and you think there might be somebody occasionally using that spot in your property, prevent that when it really matters. And we have a weather forecast like that, it really matters. And the other thing you might think about is treating those areas like that extended zone and doing something to prevent fire. And this picture here is actually one of our landings on a clear cut we have. It's up the Storyburn Road. If you know where that is, you go to the Summit Highway 6 and turn right. And at the very top end, before you get to the Hampton Gate, we did a clear cut and it has a beautiful view out over the valley. It's really a very spectacular spot. We know people are going to use the heck out of that site. We try and put in boulders to prevent parking and reduce some of the use. But after we clear cut it and then we burned the piles, we had a lot of debris left. Like any landing, there was a lot of branches that didn't get put in the pile because it was piled with a grapple. And so we went back in with our own excavator and cleaned it. And so you can see what it looks like now that actually we've just planted it too. But now someone can have a bonfire right there and I'll be able to sleep that night because I know we've done a good job of getting the slash pulled back and scraped clean, and they can have a bonfire and it won't spread. So that's one of the things we're trying to do in those high public use areas where we can't control the public use very easily, is make it more fire safe. And so you might think about doing some of that kind of work too. Okay, we mentioned this already. Help your neighbors and post on your social media site. And if you have a picture of something you've done and you're proud of it, you can send it to me and I'll post it. And I'll find a way to post it somewhere. And so happy to share that kind of information and inspire others to do the same kind of work. And then I think when all else fails, we'll come help put the fire out. This is Colin Nyes and Joel. I can't remember Joel's last name off the top of my head just now. And this is the middle of the night. This is like September 10th, and they're heading to a fire that was actually in the Tillamook district on Highway 6. And so it was like 1 o'clock in the morning and they're headed out. And before I take questions, I have one more sort of shout out. And this is the new sign that Chief Linz and the Banks Fire District put in along Highway 6. And I just think it's a great job they've done out there on that fire station. And the part I'm showing off here is the sign they put in, because now we have a way to communicate with everybody who drives Highway 6. And if you haven't seen the sign, As you go out Highway 6 on the right-hand side, as you go by the Horseshoe Creek Fire Station, you'll see that, and you can look for their fire messages all summer long. So I really wanted to appreciate the work of Chief Lynn's and the Banks Fire Station. So sorry, Mike, that was my shameless plug for our partners there in fire suppression.
No problem.
Okay.
Rodney, you remember.
Excellent, Michael.
Yeah, so that's what I brought for you. And I see there's a chat, maybe some questions there, but happy to take your questions.
That's on Highway 26.
Yeah.
26, excuse me, 26. Thank you. Yep.
All right. So while people are thinking, you guys can put your questions in chat, or you can raise your hand like Bonnie. So Bonnie, before I let you do it, I gotta ask mine. So one of the thoughts I have, Mike, is with the drier spring we've been having, are we more concerned this year about things like debris fires and that kind of stuff? Are you expecting there to be tougher standards than there have been in the past about backyard burning and debris burning, or will it just be the same? Just seems really dry to me.
You know, I heard on Friday that we're heading for a record low rainfall in April, and that's no good. And so the burning we control on forest landowners, you know, with forest slash, yes, we are being more cautious about giving permits to people to burn slash for sure. And so if people are trying to burn slash in the spring, we're going to encourage them to hold off until the fall burning opportunities. And then the rural fire departments and the backyard burning, they had a burn ban on during that east wind event last week. Yeah, I think everybody is a little more cautious and conscious of that. So I think the answer is yes. People are going to be
Good, good. Thank you. Bonnie, your question.
Yeah, it's more of a comment. This was really good information. But a few years ago, we heard Mike say in regards to fire that hope is not a strategy. And I think that's a good thing. We've quoted him many times on that, but it's just a really good thing to remember. You have to do something. Hope is not a strategy.
Yeah, that comes from my good friend in Medford, Dan Thorpe, who retired. He just loved to say that hope is not.
Right, other questions?
I'm going to stop sharing here so I can see people, if that's okay.
Good idea.
There we go. Yeah, it's good to see
Um,
some friends on here.
So Mike, I have a question.
Go ahead.
With the conditions this spring, and it seems like more recently we have been having these kinds of springs. Are we heading toward what the lake states and others have in the South, where they have two fire seasons, a spring fire season and a late fall or late summer fire season?
You know, it's interesting you say that. I think you're right. We have this little period of time in April when, before we get green up and we have some dry weather, and we know about it. We had the Mother's Day fire here in Forest Grove 5 or 6 years ago. Columbia City had a pretty good fire, but it seems like every year it's a little bit more, like a little drier, a little more risk. And the fires don't go that far. Like, I don't worry too much about them. You know, a lot of times they're in slash. If it hasn't been planted yet, you know, it's site prep, and we try not to spend this. We try and do it as inexpensively as possible. And they're definitely a headache. But yeah, I do think there's a spring fire season. I'm more worried about the summer season getting worse and longer. And we've been looking at data at the Department of Forestry, and they've been sharing it. And it's pretty dramatic about how much worse it's been. And you know, I think for those of us who've been, you know, I've been in Forest Grove now 9 or 10 years as a district forester, and that 9 or 10 years have been much worse than my predecessors. You know, and I think about what their jobs were like when they didn't have any big fires. But that's kind of scary to think that it changed that much in 10 years. And the climate change, all the stuff they give us from the state work, you know, looking at 5 to 9 degree change increase in the next 40, 50 years. And I don't know what that means for our forests. I'm worried about it. So.
All right. While you guys are thinking, I want to make a plug. As you are aware that OFRI, along with OSU Extension and the Partnership for Forestry Education, run a webinar series called Tree School Online. And next week on Tuesday, May 4th, our speaker is Mike Caffaretta and Rodney Jacobs from Stimson Lumber. and they're going to talk about a very similar topic to what we've been talking about tonight, but it's about managing logging slash piles and burning them. And that's Tuesday, May 4th at 3 p.m. But I want to show you now, go stop share and hold up to my screen. This is a new OFRI publication that Mike helped write along with Julie Woodward and Rodney Jacobs, and some good input from OSU Extension on managing logging slash piles in Northwest Oregon. It's got some really good stuff, and we're going to have a video out pretty soon. They're still working on that, but the book is out now, and Mike and Rodney are doing the Tree School Online next Tuesday. So if you can't get enough of Mr. Cafferata, you get another shot.
Thanks, Mike. You know, that the Northwest Forest Protective Association, the landowners in this area, we had a tour about a year and a half ago now, and they said, look, our loggers are all building piles differently. We all have different levels of expertise. Some of us are new. What is the right way to do this? And they're absolutely right. And when I drive around the district, I see piles built, in a way that make them very difficult to burn, that makes them smolder for weeks, that become a spread hazard. And so what we're trying to do is help everybody understand what the right way to do it is, so that if any of you have a logger work on your property and the logger says, I'll build your slash piles for you, that's great. And you can say, and here's how I want it done. And they might say, oh, no, I got this handled. You can say, nope, I don't want you to do it that way. I want to do it this way. And Rodney has burned more piles in this district probably than any 10 other people put together. And so wealth of knowledge there. And I think we've really captured in that document. So
it's pretty well done.
I'm excited.
So I think you have a question, Kathy, but before you do, I want to just point out that Dana posted in the chat, the new term is fire year rather than fire season. They used to say that in California a long time ago, and I'm afraid that's coming this way. So what's your question, Kathy?
Well, I was actually wondering if you were involved in the Chehalem Ridge fire at all, or if you had any comments on that. I mean, it was another fairly large fire in Washington County, and we heard a lot about it, at least.
Sure, it was. And what a difficult job for it was in Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue's fire district, and we could see it up on the hill. We were pretty busy, so I remember like hearing the radio squawking all night long, thinking, wow, they're having a tough time too. And they worked, I can't tell you how hard they worked on that. So I think, successful, right? So that very few houses, no houses burned. I think an outbuilding or two burned is all. We're trying to share expertise back and forth more. We sent them a lot of resources. So when the scooper plane that we got, what a great thing a scooper plane is, by the way. I tried to get them on standby for the summer, and they're incredibly expensive. So we couldn't afford, as a Department of Forestry, to put them on standby, which is too bad because they're awesome. But anyway, we managed to get them to help on our fire, and we shared them with Chehalem Mountain so they could help get that help. But difficult environment, right? Just a windy, dry night.
So I actually, this brings up a question. In California, those are called the Santa Ana winds, right? Like they have a similar weather pattern where they get super dry, hot air blowing from the east. And
Yep.
and is it similar or?
Yep. It's, in fact, everybody has their name for them. There's the Santa Anas down south. There's the Chinook winds, phone winds, I think. We call them the east winds.
Huh.
But yeah, it is interesting. It's well known, right? It's a phenomena that everybody's familiar with.
It doesn't seem to happen in Washington.
The gorge funnels it through.
Oh.
So ours is pronounced here because of the gorge. I think we get them in Washington. I'm not sure what they call them up. Anybody else know the answer to that question? No.
Huh. Maybe we need a different name for them than just east winds. That doesn't sound scary enough. We need to name them something scarier.
Mordor winds.
Right.
So Ron, do you have a question, Lori?
Yeah, I was just curious if the county is doing anything intentionally, like Washington County, Clackamas County, for brush clearing other than the brush hogs that they take by in anticipation of fire season. Several of our properties are along busy roads in rural areas, and while we've limbed up and tried to take brush back, you know, sometimes it feels like if somebody were to drop a cigarette right along our road where we abut that busy road, it would just take off and fly up the hill to our house and, you know, take out our homes. So just curious what, if anything, besides, I mean, we're doing all the trying to limb up and have the clear space around our homes, that kind of thing, but just what, if anything?
Lori, I think that's a great, I mean, that's, you're identifying the risk. And I think that's exactly what your risk probably is. That is a high, I mean, we have that. We have cars that drop, you know, they have a mechanical problem. They drop a superheated piece of metal and it
Right.
the highway. You know, we have an RV, you know, an RV overheats and they pull off and the thing's on fire. That's, and so then what do you do to mitigate that? You certainly can call a county if they
Yeah.
grass grow long and encourage them to come cut the grass.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they will or not.
Yeah.
I don't know how many feet it is, whether you could do it yourself.
I do most some of it. I have to be really strategic as to time and day because it's Elwert. If you're familiar with that in Washington County, people use it between Newburgh and Hillsborough as a shortcut.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and there is no shoulder, and we're being told that there's like up to 15,000 to 22,000 cars a day that use that, and it's literally 11, I think it's a 20-foot or 22-foot wide road with no shoulder. So I can mow a portion of it where they can still see me, but it's got a lot of hills. So I can't do all of it. It's just not safe.
Right. But I think what you're doing there is the right thing to do. And that's the kind of thing that I would like encourage everybody to do, is to find those kind of spots and protect yourself. Exactly.
All right. Ron Larson, question.
Yeah, in the video you had of the skidder moving debris out of the way, how close to the fire was he in that?
You know, we like to say, Ron, 1 foot in the black. And so he was, you know, trying to be right next to the fire. And the goal there is to have no green, you know, no unburned material between the fire and the fire line. Now you can't get quite that close. He's going to go as close as he can. And then in that case, I'm sure had the rural fire department trying to follow behind him with a hose to keep it from jumping over that fire line. And they're just trying to flank that fire, you know, day and night until they get in front of it to keep it from.
Really have to admire that.
Yeah. I'm going to find, I have a bunch of coins and I'm going to meet with Scotland and Timber and with Bighorn Logging in their spring fire get ready meetings and tell them thanks. And I got a little challenge coin to say thank you with, because whoever was doing that was a good piece of work. So.
All right. I know your name's really not Susan, but it says Susan by your picture there. So what's the question?
It's Scott, but I identify as Susan. In the past, it seems like they talk about a wet spring and it encourages all of the weed growth, which makes it even more volatile. So is there some good news from this spring by not having much rain?
You know, Scott, I'll never forget last summer when they said, it's going to be an early wet fall. If you could just get through August, there's rain coming in early September. You remember that?
Yeah.
The weather forecast, that was like their mantra. Just get through August. It's going to be a wet September. And so, you know, I actually don't believe anything about the summer. We'll take it one day at a time. I don't even look at the forecast anymore for the long range stuff. I really don't think they have any idea. They said this year would be like 2015 and 2014. And so if you remember those years, they were not good years. We had the August fire. That was the one that was target shooting caused and burned across Highway 26 and shut it down there. That was Windy Cornet. If you remember Windy Cornet, it went up on Highway 84, blew through community of Stacey's Gulch. It was a couple of tough years. So.
Well, it seems like everybody complains about the weather, but nobody does anything about it.
I know it, right?
Okay, get after it, Mike.
I am
Pretty
going to,
profound there,
I
Scott.
appreciate that. I'm going to celebrate it as a dry spring should be shorter grass. So
All right.
Take the win.
Well, I think it's almost 8:30, so great show, Mike. Thank you all for being here. Good turnout today. Neither Vic nor Mark have shown up, so I will turn it to John and Kathy for any last words, because all I have is May 26th.
Well, thanks, Mike. I think that's about all we have as well. Thanks, Mike. Great presentation as always. And I think Scott is off, but enjoyed his presentation as well. Come back on the 26th, and don't forget, we're going to have a couple of tours coming up this summer. So be ready for those. Time to get back in the swing of those.
Yeah, read your Forest Forum in May. It'll have lots of details there.
Listen to Bonnie.
Listen to Bonnie
Always.
and Tom. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks,
and good
Thank you
night.
very much.
Thank you.
have a good night. Thank you.